This is a Gemara Metziah, Daf Kof Aleph, and we're holding in the bottom of Kof Amid Beis at the Mishnah. Teaches the Mishnah, Moicher Zitov Leitzim Va'asu Pachais Meravius. If someone sells Zitov, his olive trees, why did he sell them? Not for the olives, but rather Leitzim, for their wood. Va'asu Pachais Meravius. And they did not produce a lot, but rather their trees produce less than a ravius of lisa per saw. Hareilu shel balazitim. The halacha is that the olives belong to the owner of the tree. Also ravius lisa. But let's say they did indeed produce a normal quantity, which is ravius or more per saw. Zeoimer Zaiti Gedli. So now we have a machlekes. The buyer says, I bought these trees, so my trees produce this crop, so I get to keep the olives. Zeoimer, the seller says, no. Artzi Gadla. Yes, you bought the trees, but they're still standing in my field. So to my land that produced these peiros, these zaitov, what's the halacha? Yachloiku. Since in reality, both the land and the trees combined to create these produce, therefore, Lamaisa, the halacha is Yachloiku. Case number 2 in the Mishnah, Shatav Nar Zaitav. If a river came and carried away one's olives, and deposited the olives in a neighbor's field, and they stayed there. Zamer Zaiti Gadla, Amar Arsi Gadla. And then this one said, it's my trees that produced it, while the neighbor claims, no, it's my land that produced it. Again, what's the halacha in this case? Yachlaiku, they're going to split the crop, and the Gemara is going to explain exactly the story over here, but the simple understanding is that after the river moved my trees into someone else's field, those trees then went and grew peiros. And now that owner claims, it's my land. I let these trees that landed here, I let them stay here. So it's my land that caused these peiros to grow. Whereas I say, what do you mean? They're my trees. Says the Mishnah, Yachloiku. So begins the Gemara with the first case in the Mishnah, which had a critical ingredient of differentiating between the trees producing more or less than a revius lissa. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, Kuf Amid Beis, Heichi Dami. Alter. If when someone bought these trees, the buyer said, cut them down immediately, the seller originally said, cut them down immediately, then who cares how much it produces? Then the owner of the land clearly wanted to keep the peiros. Again, they're selling the trees le'etzim. Can't forget that critical ingredient. Let's just go back to Rashi for a moment. Rashi says that he's going to cut them down from firewood. So if the seller said, okay, I'm selling you two, cut it down right away, then who cares how much peiros there are? They clearly are maintained and stayed by the seller, the Baal Karka. If the seller said, whenever you want, you can cut it down, then the opposite. Who cares how much it produced? You bought it. The guy said you could keep it there for as long as you want, so then you keep everything. So explains the Gemara, the case of the Mishnah is Lo Yisricha to Amar Le Stama. The seller sold these trees for wood stama. So now, how do we determine who gets to keep the produce? So Pachas ve'Revius lo kapti inchi. Revius kapti inchi, and therefore at the Revius is the point that people are makbid. So the original seller, we will be allowed to keep them. Amar of Shimon Pazi. So Shimon Pazi explains the drop deeper Revius. Shamru, and this Revius that we're talking about, as we turn over to Kav Aleph, Amid Aleph, Chotz, how do we calculate this Revius? Says Rav Shimon Bazi, an important nikuda, that it is Chotz, excluding min ha'itza. We have to exclude the ha'itza that is utilized to harvest the olives, etc. Then we calculate the revius after that. Says the Gemara, top line, Shatav Nar Zaytav. The second case of the Mishnah, the river carried away his trees, deposited them in someone else's field. Case of the Mishnah is they uprooted the trees with their gush, with their dirt underneath it. And only after 3 years that they went into the neighbor's field and grew there. But if within 3 years my trees are in your field, then it's fully my tree, so I get everything. The Amar Lei, what's the reason? Because I can tell you again, if my trees were washed away by the river into your field, the Amar Lei, if you would have planted trees right away, would have been allowed to eat the peiros the first 3 years? And the answer is no. Why? Because of the din of Arla. Arla teaches that for the first 3 years, you're not allowed to utilize the peiros of the crop. So within 3, of course, you're not going to be able to utilize the fruits anyways. Says the Gemara, V'lei malei. Why can't the neighbors say back, if I would have planted it, then what? After 3 years, I would eat everything because there'd be no more arla. So hashta now, you should eat, you should split the fruit with me. The neighbor should be able to say, if I would have planted something right away, then it would take 3 years to grow, and then I would get everything. But right now, what did I do? I didn't plant trees. I allowed your trees to stay in my field. Therefore, the reason is that I want to gain something today. Because after 3 years, I would have gained from my own trees. If I left your trees in my field, says the Gemara, I could taina that I want to get something today. That's why I left them there. And indeed, they'll have to split. They should have to split the crop. So what's the case of the Mishnah? Ella Kiyasa Ravin. 10 lines down, the first one line is Ravin. Explains the Gemara, Ella Kiyasa Ravin, Amar Reish Lakish. La Yishanu, the din of the Mishnah is only Ella. Shenakru Bigushehen, that they were uprooted with their earth, Ubetech Shalish. And it's within 3 years. That's what we differentiate. Indeed, I call the Balakarkatam Malay and Anatola Achar Shalish. If I would have planted my own things, I would eat them. Then I should eat it now. Says Mar 1 second. The one whose trees were blown away until you guys feel, let him say, within the first 3 years, you would not be able to eat. So right now, you should only be able to eat half with me. Why are you now claiming you get the whole thing from today? It should be only after 3 years. Says the Gemara, because the neighbor, the one who the trees were blown into, could say, if I would have planted my own trees, they would be smaller trees which don't have any shadows. Vizarana tuchtayu silka v'yarka, and I'd be able to plant beneath them other types of vegetation and eat it. But now that I let your trees, which are larger trees, more branches, creating shade, to be staying in my field, I'm losing out, and therefore I want to be able to eat the produce even now within the first 3 years. That's the reason why he can claim that he wants to be able to eat half of the crop even right now. Says the Gemara Tana. We're about 15 lines down. The first one line is Techutayu. Tana Amar Hala Zaitai. Says the Gemara, if the other one said, I'm taking back my olive trees, as Zaitani Daitel Ein Shaimim Lai, we do not allow him to take back his trees. You have to leave them in the neighbor's field, even though after 3 years you're going to lose rights to it. But you're not allowed to take up the trees. Of course, the neighbor is going to have to compensate for the value of the tree once he gets it after the 3 years. But the original owner that had his trees carried away by the river in someone else's fields is not allowed to uproot them. My time What is the reason? Says the Gemara, Rav Yechon Misham Yishov Eretz Yisrael. Rav Yirmi Kondas Richi Rabba. For something like this, we need a lot of explanation that the Gemara is claiming that this is only in Eretz Yisrael, that we're nervous if you're going to uproot the trees, then the land that the trees came from will not be planted, and therefore we want more of Eretz Yisrael inhabited. That's the reason why you're not letting go and get back your trees. Tanan Asam Anudin. Rav Yehuda, if one rents, leases a Sada Avaisa, an ancestral field from a guy, Maiser and Noisein Loi. The law is he has to take off Meiser, and he gives it to the guy, then he gives the guy whatever the share of the guy is. Let's say, the example that Rashi brings down over here is, let's say the field produces 100 barrels, whatever it is, bushels, and therefore you have to take off Meiser and Chaimish, all the different numbers. You got 22, so you got to give 50. You got to give the guy, the owner, his half, and then you only get 28, and then when he takes 11, and there'll be 11 left. Okay, it's a little bit of a difficult math over here. Maybe let's take a moment and let's read this. Let's read this together in Rashi. Says Rashi, Hamakabel lemechsa. That's detail number one, that they're splitting everything in this field. The halacha is Meiser v'Naisen Lai, Meiser techila kol atvua. So the truth is, Rashi just lays it down very simply. If there's 100 items and I have to take a meiser, I have to give up a lot more meiser, even though really I'm only getting 50. So one might think, no, okay, so give the guy his 50, and of the remaining 50, take meiser. That's the chiddush that we're learning over here in this Mishnah, is that no, you have to first take off meiser and then separate and give the guy his half. Says the Gemara, Savroa. So they thought, my stay avoisav. What does it mean, stay avoisav? Eretz Yisrael. We thought this means a land in Eretz Yisrael. V'may karle stay avoisav. Sadavra means of Yaakov. Number one. V'kosavar number two. Ein kinyan l'nachri b'Eretz Yisrael lafki amiyan ma'aser. A big machlokes, but says the Gemara, we assume that when a guy owns land in Eretz Yisrael, there is still a chiyuv ma'aser, and that's the reason why when this land is bought for the guy, you have to take a ma'aser. Umekabel kechoicher dami, and a sharecropper, again, because what was the case? You're mekabel lemechsa, you're getting 50%, you're giving the guy back 50%. Says the Gemara, we're assuming he's like a choicher, like a tenant farmer, meaning ma choicher bein eved, bein avad, bein loy avad, bayi isuri. The din by a choicher is whether the field produces, whether the field does not produce, one has to give back to the owner. Bayi isuri umeitan lei, and therefore one has to give of meiser, give the owner his portion. It's like you're paying back your chayv. Av makabel nami kibrei chayv asay dami, and that's the reason why meiser v'naisin lai. That's the reason why we think that halacha is you first take off meiser, and only after do you give the guy back his half. So the Gemara says that in order to get to the din that we're quoting, there's many steps that have to happen. We have to assume it's a field of Eretz Yisrael. It's a field that a guy owns, which will not be mafkia midei meiser. The makabel is like a chaycher dami, and therefore you first take a meiser, and only afterwards you give the guy his share. So Amar le Rav Kahana le Rav Papi, based on the aforementioned explanation of Amar le Rav Zvid, Elahad Tanya. What do we do with the brayso that says Rav Yehuda, Mer makabel stay avoisav? That Rav Yehuda taught if someone accepts stay avoisav mi meitzik nachri, from a guy that took this field from someone else, meiser v'naisin lai. So my area meitzik. So it sounds like in that brayso it's only because it was a guy that took the field forcefully. But according to what we're saying now, if you ain't meitzik nami, and any time you're taking from a guy, the same din would be. Says the Gemara, a new way of learning the brayso. Really, I'll agree to you that yesh kinyan l'nachri b'Eretz Yisrael afki amiyan meiser. really there is a kinyan to the guy to exempt the produce from Meiser. Umekabel lav kechachardami. So what does it mean stay avaisav? And why over here is it Meiser v'naisin? My stay avaisav, stay avaisav mamish. It means the field that literally belonged to his parents. And we're talking about a case that, how did the guy get this field? He took it from someone else's father, meaning from a yid. Uladidei, who the Kansur Rabban. And therefore he, the Rabbanim, were canasing. The idea, the Chaviv Alei, for since the field is dear to him, to Fei, Ba'azel, Umekabelei, therefore he's going to rent it anyways. And that's why he first takes off Meiser and then gives to the guy. Again, he's getting back from the guy his own Zaydas, his own grandfather's field. So if you're buying back your grandfather's field for you, we can create a kanas. Because for you, we know it's not going to deter you. You'll first give a Meiser, and then you'll give the guy back a share. But in the regular case, we would not do this. Why not? Because we require someone to take Meiser off the whole thing, and only afterwards give the, guy a share. Then one would refrain from giving off the appropriate meisters, and he would never let, or even better, he would never lease his field for the guy. Says the Gemara of 1 second, why are we canasting? What did he do wrong? It was his grandfather's field that a guy took that he's now renting back. So why are we canasting him? What did he do wrong? Omer Rav Yechon, 10 lines from the wide lines, and Kafal from Aleph. The reason is, says the Gemara, you're right. He didn't do anything wrong, but we wanted the field to become strong in his hands, and therefore, what's he going to do? He's going to go and figure out a way to return this field back to original owner. Meaning we're making it difficult for him so that he doesn't end up keeping it. But rather he says, this is wild, this is crazy. You know what? Let me figure out a way to get this field back to the original owner. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, again, you need a big raya the second time of the day to say such a din. Continues the Gemara, 8 lines from the wide lines. Itmar hayoyred. First word of the line is hayoyred l'teichstei chaveroi v'nata. If someone goes down into his friend's field, v'nata, and he plants trees there, sheloi bershos, without the owner's intent. Amar Rav, shamin levi yada al tachtaina. Says Rav, we evaluate his expenses, we evaluate that which he added to the field, and Yodai ala tachtoina, he has the lower hand, meaning he gets paid the lower amount depending on whether his expenses are more than the profit, or the profit's more than the expenses. He who went down and randomly planted something in his friend's field, our shas, he gets the lower amount. That is Rav. Shmuel Amar Oimnim Kamad wrote Lita Besadazu. Linaita says Shmuel, no. We evaluate how much would someone give for someone to plant into his field. If I would pay my gardener $100, so I pay this guy $100. Amar Abba Vilay Pligi. Rav and Shmuel aren't arguing, says Rabba. If it was waiting to be planted, if I was going to anyways get the gardener, it's a normal field to plant, and I just have to compensate him what I would have been paid. But if not, then it is Yadai ala tachtoina. V'hadi Rav, says the Gemara, lav befeirish itmar, ela mechlala itmar. Rav didn't say this explicitly, it was inferred. From where the first wide line, that who does like Kamei de Rav, Amar le Zil, Shom lei. Someone came to Rav, and Rav said to him, go evaluate the expenses, evaluate the improvements, and figure it out. Amar le loy be'ina. So the person says, no, I don't want the trees he planted, because I don't usually plant trees in my field. Amar le Zil, Shom lavi yadach tachtoina. Okay, so he gets the lower hand. Amar le loy be'ina. I'm not even interested in that. I don't want the trees at all. The Saif, what happened? Chazia the Gadrav Kamanter law. At the end, you know what they saw? He didn't actually remove the trees, and they saw he fenced in the field, and he was gaining from these trees. Amar lei. So Rav said to him, "Golos adaitach." You know, you just showed us that you were happy with what happened. Zil Shom Lei. So go evaluate. And now V'yadai Al Hel Yoino. Now you got to pay the upper hand because clearly you're happy. And this is the story that we inferred what the Shita of Rav is, that it's Yad Al Tachtaina if he had no interest, but if not, that indeed it would be Yadai Al Hel Yoino. Says the Gemara, Itmar, 4 lines into the very wide lines. Itmar ayoyreid letay charvasay shel chaveroi uban hashleiber shusay. Someone went down into his fellow's field, and charvasay, his fellow's destroyed field, and he rebuilt it. He didn't ask permission. He just went down and rebuilt his friend's field. V'amar loi. And afterwards, he said to the owner, "Eitzai v'avonai ani noitel." He said, "I'm taking back the materials I used to build this up. I'm not going to shayim l'ay, if she's ain shayim l'ay." So we have a machlekes whether he's allowed to take back that which he did. Again, you have a broken down building, I go and I rebuild it, and then subsequently I want to take back my materials. Am I allowed or not? Says the Gemara. So Rav Nachman said we listen to him. Meisvei asks the Gemara, Rashbago Yimer. Beis Shammai Oimrim teaches Beis Shammai. Shaimim Lai, we listen to Beis Oimrim. Ein Shaimim Lai. So Lemer Rav Nachman Amker Beis Shammai. Answers the Gemara, Domikai Tana de Tanya. Shaimim Lai Diver Shimon Elazar. Shimon Gamliel Oimrim Beis Shammai Oimrim Shaimim Lai Beis Oimrim Ein Shaimim Lai. So according to Shimon Elazar, it's not a machlekes. Rav Nachman holds like Shimon Elazar. So my have Allah says, what's the maskana? Rav Yaakov Yechanan. As we turn over to Kuf Aleph Amid Beis Bebayis, if we were discussing a house, then Shaimim Lai. But Besada in Shaimim Lai. Besada my time up. We should be Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, we don't let him to take back his materials as we want the lands of Eretz Yisrael to be settled, etc. Weakens land, because you will not have the svara, of course, of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. We continue with the Mishnah. Kov Aleph Amid Beis HaMaschir Bayis L'Chaveiroi. If someone rents a house to his friend, v'yimosik shamim in the rainy days, in the winter, in yachol yitzia min hachag vad Pesach. The halacha is he cannot evict the tenant from Sukkot until Pesach. In the summer, though, as long as you give him 30 days notice, you can kick him out. And in the large cities, then you have to give 12 months notice. Regarding a store, Rashba Goimer, Chanushal Nachtaimim, Baker, Vishal Tzvaim, or a dyer, Shali Shanim, you have to give a full 3 years notice before kicking the person out. Says the Gemara, and again, all these numbers are there to benefit the current tenant, whether it's because in the larger cities it's hard to find a place to stay, or whether it's because if the guy has a store, we have to assume that maybe people bought on credit and we can't just kick him out the next day. He needs time to collect, etc., etc. Says the Gemara, that's 2 lines from the wide lines. What's the difference? Because people rent house in the winter. Why? The norm is that he wants to be there for the whole winter. Therefore, you can't kick him out. But says the Gemara, so why in the summer can you kick him out after 30 days? It's also normal to rent for the whole summer. Ella says the Gemara, you're right. In the second white line, they're not normal. It's not easy to find a house to rent in the winter, and therefore we have to give him more time. Says Gemara, 1 second. The Seif said, and the Brisa continues and explains a little bit more that if the Schiros would come to end in the winter, sounds like you would, yes, throw him out. Because what did the Mishnah say? That 12 months in the Krachim. So it sounds like wherever the 12 months come, if it comes up in the winter, we can throw him out in the winter. It's not normal to find the house right then. The Mishnah, when it said 30 days, which said 12 months, it meant lohidia, to notify the tenant before evicting him. Achi kamar. Hamas, cherbais lechaveros tam, ein yachol loitzim ozing yisham, v'chad v'avesach, and you can't kick him out. Unless you let him know originally. Tananami hachi. A Bryce that proves this. If he wants to leave, because the owner can say, if you would have let me know, I would have went to find someone else to take over from you. Amar Rav Asi. Continues Rav Asi, we're about 12 lines down. The first one line is Asi. Once someone stays for one day in the winter, you can't kick him out the whole winter. But the Mishnah says that once you come to Sukkot, it's 30 days. Then if even one of the days of one of the 30 days in the winter, then says Rav Huna, the landlord wants to increase the rental, he's allowed to. Even if you didn't tell him, he's allowed to increase the cost. Says Rav Nachman, I understand. If you're allowed to raise the rent without any notice, he's like one who holds the tenant by his cluster. This is, with the dates hang from the cluster, so that he'll give away his clothing. Meaning that's the greatest way of evicting someone, by just raising his rent overnight. Says the Gemara, the case is where the market went up, then he's allowed to raise in accordance to the market. Says the Gemara Pshita. The following is Pasha at the two dots, smack in the middle of the white lines, and kafal from the base. Nafal lay base. If the person's house collapsed, Amar lay loy divaminai. He could tell the tenant, "You're no better than I am, and therefore I have nowhere to live right now. So you got to leave. So I have a house." Zamne oy arte oy avei b'matana. But if the landlord gives it away as Yerusha, or gives it as a present to a third party, then Amar Lei, the tenant could say, Loya Difa, Mikavra Dafis Minai, you are no greater than the person you're coming from, meaning you're not allowed to kick me out. Just like the owner couldn't kick me out, whether it was 30 days, 12 months, or any time of year, you, just because you bought it, cannot do that either. Klale Libere, says the Gemara, let's say the owner married off his child and he wants to give him somewhere to live, Chazinan. If he could have told me, then you're no greater than I, and therefore he could evict him, just like the father would be able to evict him for himself. And one last story, someone bought a lot of wine and he couldn't find a place to store it. He said to a woman, she said she didn't have anywhere to store it. So the man went and married her, and then she gave him a place to bring in the wine. The man went back home because he divorced her now. Shadar law, and he sentenced her. She went, and she went and she hired people, and to do what? And they took the wine. They removed the wine and put it outside the house. Just like you did, she's doing back. You were nice, so you're getting it back to you. It says the Gemara, but guess what? You tricked me. The dumbest alai ki ara arba. Why? Because there was like a lion ambush. I have no interest in renting it to you, so she could just take your stuff out. And Rashba Gomer shalach tov shal sfan shal shanim tana memnei sheikiva merubo. That's the reason, because they give a lot of credit. And therefore, we have to give them more time to get out of the store so they could collect from all their purchasers, etc. And pick it up from the Mishnah in Mirza Hashem.